Hey Computer, play About Bees podcast.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back once again for another stunning episode of About Bees, Culture, Curiosity, and Culture, and Curiosity. This is Ron Miksha. I'm co-host of this podcast with
Bedzina Mosiashvili. How are you doing, Ron?
I've seen better days, for an old guy. I can't really complain too much. I'm doing okay. I'm not gonna, I've been in and out of the hospital lately.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I cut you off on a really, but you were just came out of the hospital, you said?
Yeah. I was even back again this morning. I'm doing okay though. I'm gonna live. I'm gonna live another to the end of this podcast, almost guaranteed. I'll make it to the end of this podcast. So for listeners who are worried about that, we're gonna first have some really exciting, interesting news. We'll get that here first for you, so that we can have, like just have that out of the way, and you can kind of enjoy
Yeah.
what's going on in the world of bees, some of the new things happening. But Zena has found a really interesting article about bumblebees, and then we're going into our main theme today is
Spring feeding.
yay, there he goes. Yeah, spring feeding. That's the main theme. That's what we're going to cover the most of today.
Yeah.
Go ahead. You speak. I'm going to set up my PowerPoint because I have a lot of pictures to show. So I need to be able to share my screen. Share screen.
There's some construction going on in my neighborhood, so if you guys hear any background noise, I apologize for that.
Aw,
Do you hear anything?
I hear nothing.
Oh, perfect.
Nothing. No, there's no background noise here. Did somebody just yell?
Right now?
Yeah. That
Yeah,
I
it's
did
the-
hear. I thought I heard somebody give a big shout out or something.
That is the construction noise.
Oh, that's the noise. I was expecting to hear like a big engine or rocks rumbling or something like that. But I tend to hog all the conversation here. And if you don't speak as much as you'd like to, tough. Just tough. Just toughen it out. You're Canadian, right? You do have Canadian citizenship. You
I
are
have Canadian citizenship. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm sure that you're gonna be just fine with, being tough about not talking as much as you'd like to, but, because that's the way Canadians are. They're just tough. They're just tough.
Well, we like
W- w-
to. We definitely, the Canadian, I guess, likes to turn the other cheek a lot of the times
Until,
until they have
you
a
got
hockey
those
game.
blades. I was just gonna say, till you got those
Yeah.
blades on your feet and the water is frozen, then there's no turning back of any cheeks.
That's right. They turn
so-
into the Canadian geese.
Yeah, you saw that video? The Canada goose fighting off the bald eagle? That
No.
was all over the internet. Oh, man. I thought you lived on the internet. That was all over the place. There was some people were just looking out over the lake, frozen lake, in their backyard in Ontario, and they're looking out there, and they're just kind of watching for animals and this and that, and they saw this one lone Canada goose all by itself on the ice. And as they were watching and filming, a huge bald eagle swooped down and tried to grab the goose and carry it off, dinner. So the Canada goose saw what was happening just in time, jumped up, spread its wings way out, and started squawking, like onking or honking or whatever they do. And the bald eagle backs up a little bit, and then the bald eagle attacks. Then the Canada goose, kind of swings around and comes back at the eagle, and the eagle backs up. So then they're just going at each other for a minute or two, and then finally the bald eagle says, "You know what? it's not worth capturing Canada. I'm just going to fly away now. And it did.
Well,
And that Canada
wow.
goose lived to be the hero of that story.
Well,
So,
the Canada goose is a very powerful and misunderstood creature. But it can do some harm. But while we're on the topic of talking about flying creatures fighting each other, I'm not going to take it that direction, Ron. I know what you're thinking of. It's not aliens, but
okay.
but
Alrighty, well,
I see.
as long as it's
Yeah, sorry. As long as
related to something that
it's
can be proven, that's real, that we know
well,
about, then I'm
it's.
fine.
I have a hypothetical question to ask you, and I wanted to see
Uh-oh.
what you would think. And I'm like, oh my God, look at this. We have two bumblebees that are kind of head to head right in front of us. That's the logo of the About Bees podcast, drawn by your daughter, hand drawn,
Yeah, she did. She did draw that. She
painted,
drew one
sorry.
as a gift for me. Yes. Yep, painted. So, and it's pretty good. I mean, she doesn't consider herself to be an artist, but she is good.
Right.
Anyhow,
So,
she did that as a gift for me, and then of course I just mirrored it to turn it into two. So it's like the two bumblebees, and then the two flowers below are supposed to be like the
yeah,
microphones that you and I
right.
have.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
in my mind, I've been giving my friends this hypothetical question. So, the Russians, they have their like thing is the bear, right? Their mascot is the Russian bear.
Mhm.
Don't poke the
Right.
bear. You have the American as the eagle. So in my mind, I'm like, what if you were to take an eagle and make it grizzly bear size, and then you were to take a grizzly bear and give it wings like an eagle and get them to go head to head? Who would win?
Oh.
An eagle-sized grizzly bear, or a grizzly bear with the wings like that has the ability to fly?
I'm gonna
Like a,
go with the grizzly bear-sized eagle, the bald eagle that's huge like a grizzly bear. I think that size and weight and the agility that would come with it, like, it could snap around, that bald eagle can move around so fast. But,
yeah.
I think even if it were yeah, no, I think that's what would happen is that bald eagle has the potential of shredding that Russian bear, just tearing it apart. I
I
saw
guess, yeah,
recently
its talons would get huge,
Mhm.
and it would
That's right.
it would be more agile because although it could, but it would be it would be like a raptor, dinosaur
Yes,
raptor.
yes. Yep, yep. And I think that, that bear would probably be drunk anyway, so it should be pretty easy to take it down. So we're talking
You
about
know what?
spring
Yeah,
feeding
I'll go.
today.
I agree.
Yeah?
I agree,
We're
actually.
We're talking about spring feeding today, but I did want to start off, Bidzina, if you don't mind. I have a couple of images here. First of all, I want to remind people that Apimondia is coming up in Denmark, in Europe, and that's coming up towards the end of October. And so far, they've had 1,039 abstracts from 88 different countries from around the world. And you can see by the coloration on the map in the middle of the scene that I've got up that the United States and China probably have the most submissions of abstracts of any country. And then Canada, Brazil, most of Europe, India, they also rank very highly in the number of abstracts that have been sent in. Now, there won't be 1,039 talks. They already told us that there is not enough time and enough space to put everybody up there who would like to talk. And we're going to have to just see how it plays out. But I did send in my abstract, and it falls under the category of pollination and bee flora. So under that broad, generalized topic, I'm going to be speaking, if they allow me to talk, if they choose me, which, is not a given. Like um, we'll see. We'll see who they pick. But my topic would be explaining and showing the different modes of operation between honeybees, which tend to fly a long distance and tend to prefer very large fields and not just, like a flower here and a flower there in a backyard, compared to the native bees. So they have different foraging ranges, different foraging techniques, and because of that, they end up working usually, but not always, usually different flowers from the flowers that the native bees would be working. So that's what my talk is going to be if I have a chance to present. I just want to remind people, Denmark, yeah, I was there once. I thought it was fantastic. I enjoyed it so much. I only spent about 3 days, went to the city of Aarhus, which is along the inner coast line, and got a really nice tour of an ancient village there, like a medieval village, and also toured a Viking ship from centuries ago, and they could let you walk on it and so on. It was really fun, really, really nice. So, are you going to go there? Zena, you got to
And
go.
this is like, it's actually incredible. I had a dream last night where I was there with you. And then, and I believe I was only there in the dream. I was only there for 3 days or whatever, however long the event lasted for. And you were staying behind vacationing. And so I got stuck at the airport. I couldn't get back to Calgary when I was trying to head back
Well,
in stream.
I hope you made the best of it being over there during that dream. Aren't dreams weird? Like, that is a weird
Well, they are
dream.
weird because I want to say another thing. I don't know if I should, but in the dream, you were walking and running.
Oh, great. I would love that. But in my dream,
Yeah.
you would have been pushing my wheelchair. But no, that's really cool. For the longest time, my dreams also included me walking and running, and only in the last few years do I show up. I'm thinking about where did I leave my wheelchair, or can my wheelchair go up that ramp? And within the dream, So
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. So that's a really interesting thing that you would come up. I hope you can make it over there. I know you have classes in the fall during this time, and it's pretty expensive too. Denmark is one of the more expensive countries in Europe, and the hotel rooms and the flights and the food. And Apimondia is not a cheap date either. They charge quite a bit to get in but I think it's worth it. And I do hope that a lot of listeners are going to make up their mind and say, yeah, let's go to Denmark this year. I know of a couple of people in Calgary who said they're going to be going over too.
Yeah. My friend, his uncle lives in Denmark, or I might be mistaken it with another Scandinavian country, but if I don't know if that is, I don't want to, like, we'll see.
Those countries are all so close.
Yeah.
And now that they quit going to war against each other constantly, they're almost indistinguishable. I mean, they're lovely, smart,
I mean, yeah, they got like all three of them got the same flag, it looks like.
Something like that. Yeah. Anyway, let's go to Apimondia, everybody. The other thing I wanted to talk about today, will lead back to politics, so I hope I don't lose too many of my good American friends with this, but maybe they're curious to know how we feel up here sometimes about things. So, on again, off again, we've had threats and impositions of tariffs, which could be devastating to the American economy. So we're really hoping that this all settles down and we go back to free trade. We have been told that Canada is being subsidized by the Americans, and because more stuff is purchased out of Canada than Canada buys from the U.S. That's not really a subsidizing. That's not a subsidy. That's like me saying that I subsidize Walmart. Like I buy things from Walmart more than they buy from me. So I have a trade deficit with Walmart. And that's the same thing going on between Canada and the U.S. But let's kind of leave that a little bit in the back. And I've got another slide up now that talks about the production of honey in Canada, because these tariffs on again and off again make it really difficult for anybody in business to be able to plan long term of what's going to happen. How much should they invest? If you've lost most of your bees this winter and you can't ship honey to the United States, should you maybe not buy any bees and just take a sabbatical, or sell everything off and go out of business? So here are some numbers. Canada currently produces about 50 million pounds of honey each year. And last year, 2023, so it's more than last year, the United States received about 15% of Canada's production. So not all of Canadian honey goes to the U.S. In fact, only 15% of Canadian production goes into the United States. Why do we ship honey to Canada? Ship honey out of Canada into the United States? The reason the United States needs honey and buys honey from all around the world is the United States is now over 300 million people, and they have fewer colonies of bees than they had 30, 40, 50 years ago. Plus, those bees are doing more poorly because of all this colony loss and so on. And so many bees are being used. I'm sorry, I used the wrong word. Maybe I didn't. Anyway, they're being used in pollination, and that weakens them, and they don't make as much honey the following year. So the Americans fall way short of the amount of honey they need. In fact, in the United States, they only can produce about 1/3 of the honey that the Americans are eating. So 2/3 of all the honey they just don't produce enough. I mean, it'd be nice if they could, and I'm hoping for those beekeepers there that they can, get back to being a honey exporter as they were 50 years ago. But right now they are a major importer on the world scene. Well, the United States is urbanizing. There are fewer farmers, there are more pesticides, more land turned out of agriculture and into urbanization. So they cannot produce as much honey as they used to. Just on the side.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So there's, I think, double the population almost, right? They got since
That's right.
and so they got less colonies, and those colonies are producing less.
And
Wow.
people are more aware of the good quality of honey, as they're trying to avoid white sugar. And when you do need a sweetener in your cooking or just for a treat, then the honey they recognize is better for a person to eat than eating the corn syrup and sugars that they usually eat. So they're using more.
Well, if you want to make a Russian honey cake, can't make it without honey.
That's right.
I keep bringing up the Russians. I'm sorry, but we make that as well in Georgia. That stack.
Oh, I bet that's good.
Honey cake. Yeah.
We used to have a Russian store near us in our neighborhood in Southwest Calgary, and I bought honey cakes there from time to time, and they were good, but it wasn't like, oh, we're out of honey cakes, I better run out and buy some more. It was just like a nice occasional treat. So
is it like a cake pretty much?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you? Like, did they bake them, or does your family still make these honey cakes?
Yeah, so my mom makes it, and I don't know if is the one that you had with condensed milk.
Oh, I don't know what the ingredients were.
Well, the one that my mom makes, she layers it with condensed milk, and it's just like a sweet, like honey cake.
Yeah. Does she use honey?
Yeah, I believe you gotta use honey for the bread.
Have you ever made this? Bettina?
No, I've never made this myself.
You make some.
You
make some yourself.
In Georgia, typically the men are in charge of the food that's related with meat. So anything got to do with stewing, like meat-related items, is men are in charge of it, and then baking isn't really like I wasn't taught how to bake. By my
I imagine a lot of right. But you could learn this. You're in Canada now.
I like I don't know. I've never actually been thought like I love cooking, but I never had an appreciation for baking because it's very tedious to
Yeah.
and then it comes out as like cake after like 2-3
Yeah.
like days of
Yeah.
work.
Yeah. Mhm. Mhm.
All right.
Um,
Bang.
Getting back to this import-export of non-Russian honey from Canada into the United States, other honey comes into the United States from all over the world, but Canada also ships all over the world. So about an equal amount of honey left Canada and went to Japan last year as went to the United States. So it used to be that, we ship some honey to Japan, but over the last 5, 10 years, the Japanese market has opened up a lot more for Canada's really nice, good white honey. It's become very popular in Japan.
Oh.
So, it has the Canadian flag, the maple leaf, it has the label made in Canada, produced by Canadian bees, all that kind of stuff on the label, and it's been more popular. So
Mm.
anyhow, thinking about these tariffs then, it's not like a showstopper if the United States puts a 25% or they're talking even 50% tariff on food products coming from Canada into the United States. It would hurt because 15% of the honey produced in Canada disappears into the tummies of Americans. But 15% is not 60% or 80%. So the Canadian domestic market is really large because we do have about over 40 million people now,
Right.
and we do consume a lot of honey here. And the dollar value, just as a kind of a finisher here on this particular item, the dollar value last year, 2024, the value of honey that went from Canada into the United States was about $30 million. So that 25% tariff would raise $7.5 million for the American economy if that amount of honey continued to be shipped down. But it's not likely it would. I think instead there will be a hole in the market and prices would have to go up in the United States to try to encourage American producers to produce more. So the consumer is going to end up paying more anyway by not having that. And it only raises $7.5 million in cash for the Americans if they continue to import $30 million worth of honey a year into the USA from Canada. It's not big money as far as these things are concerned. I mean, we ship, I don't know what it is, $100 million of oil out of Alberta every day into the United States. I think it's 100 million, probably more, because it is close to 2 million barrels of oil every day leaves Alberta and heads down to the United States. Oh, and the picture there, talking about barrels of oil, here are barrels of honey. So you describe what you see in the picture, please.
So so we got a black and white picture here of of barrels on its side. We got maybe 20 of them side by side in a row on its side. Huge barrels, probably this 4 or 5 feet tall, probably 4 feet tall barrels,
Mm-hmm.
and men in the background. Yeah, they're all men in the background. And then you got one of them in a black suit, and the others what look to be workers. And then one of them's carrying a huge box.
Yeah, I don't know what that person's got in their box. So I'll tell you the background story for this. That's very well described. It's a colonial looking building that they're next
Right.
to because it has
I missed that.
arches, and that's fine. That's fine. And it is a period piece, not just because it's in black and white, but the way people are dressed. It was the photograph from 1902, and it's honey in Cuba. That's the colonial part of it, like the type of structure of buildings and so on. The honey is in barrels in Cuba. You can't see honey because it's inside these drums, these wooden barrels that you described, and they're being loaded onto a ship to go up to the United States. So
Wow.
even 120 years ago, some honey was brought from overseas into the United States. And in those days, Cuba and the United States, well, the United States pretty well controlled Cuba at that time, 1902. It was shortly after William McKinley had gone to war. I think it was he who went to war against Spain and acquired a number of the Spanish colonies. I think Cuba was actually set free, or maybe was already free, but it's all in that era. And American influence inside of Cuba was really, really big at that time. So they were producing honey for the American market. Anyhow, that's that picture.
This is the deal that they made with the world, right? They're like, hey, after World War II, hey, we'll protect you. We'll buy your stuff. You could be our shop. We'll be the shopping mall of the world. Or I don't know if that's the right word. You can, like our people will. You can come and set up your shops. You can set up your vendors, bring your products in, and
Right.
hopefully, their hope was that if we bring if we give them a taste of capitalism, then they'll want to be capitalists themselves. But
That's right. That's right.
but
And
yeah,
so much of the world went that way. Almost all of Europe was that way, and especially after 1990 or so. And yeah, I think that was the whole idea, that to have cooperation and trade around the world. And then, of course, there's an old saying, not that old, it's only, since the days of McDonald's being a company, is that no two countries that both had a McDonald's ever had gone to war. And that was true right up until the uh, till I think the Kosovo War, where Serbia had McDonald's, and the United States was bombing Serbia, and the Kosovo's people had also McDonald's. But until then, the idea was, if we can have trade ties between all these different countries, and even, frankly, Russia, bring Russia back in here, Russia had McDonald's, and once Russia had McDonald's, we never went to war against Russia. So I think, as awful as and uninspiring as the McDonald's food is, at least they kept the world at peace for a long time. And that's part of trade. I mean, that's just one example, but yeah. Go
there's
ahead.
there's another saying about the United States that I don't know who said this, and if it's said by if we find out it's said by someone, okay, it was said by Henry Kissinger.
Okay.
Yeah, some people might not like him, so as soon as you hear that name, you're gonna turn off everything that he said. But he said
Not
that,
necessarily. Yeah.
right,
He was a very smart guy. He was a very smart guy, a very good diplomat. Yeah, he did do some things that were pretty awful and
yeah.
encouraged some awful behavior around the world, but let's give him credit for what he said.
So he said, to be the enemy of the United States is bad, but to be the ally of the United States is fatal.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of
Uh,
we're kind of
yeah.
experienced that in a little bit right now. Yeah.
Well, it's not fatal yet, and, I think, there are so many Americans who have written to me that I've talked to that are, just as upset with the disrespect being centered around Governor Trudeau and the 51st state and all of that. There's so many people who are apologetic in the United States writing to me, talking to me, and American people are so good, so generous. We sure want to hope that all those ties stay in place anyway. Speaking of Americans, here's another photograph I want to show you. Okay. Why am I showing a picture of the recently deceased Gene Hackman, the famous actor,
Oh,
and
that's
his
rest in
wife?
peace.
Yes, yes. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I want to just bring some awareness out to all the beekeepers who have heard the story that Gene Hackman was suffering for several years from Alzheimer's, and he passed away about a week after his wife had passed away. And the poor guy probably didn't know that she had died. And she died, his wife had died earlier because she had contacted the Hantavirus. So that's a virus that's carried in the droppings of mice. And why I'm bringing that up for beekeepers is that when you run a lot of colonies of bees and you have some of them die over the winter, there is, well, even if you're a hobbyist beekeeper, this could still happen. There
Yeah.
is a possibility that mice will get into your equipment. And then you're out there, loading up all this dead, smelly equipment because the mice had invaded the dead colony and taken over the house, so taken over the hive because it's dry and it's sheltered, and they're living in there, and their droppings are going onto the bottom board of the hive. And then beekeepers tend to bring that stuff home and unload it inside their garage or inside their workshop, and then they start cleaning it, and the dust potentially can be fatal because it can carry that virus. And that's not just a maybe sometimes. It is a very frequent problem in the right conditions. Like if you're in that, you're the one that's unloading dead equipment that the mice had infiltrated, and you're trying to clean it up, and you're not wearing a mask, and you don't have gloves on. And I know beekeepers, we hate wearing masks. That's just, like I want to breathe the fresh, clean air while I'm working. Well, that fresh, clean air might be carrying the dust from mouse droppings, which might be carrying the hantavirus. And that hantavirus is a very serious problem. And just for those who are not totally aware of how it feels or what's going on, and I wouldn't be surprised if I had this more than once in Saskatchewan when I was cleaning up dead colonies. Early symptoms include fever, fatigue, and aches. And some years I would be hit so hard by that at the time of the year when you think, the days are getting longer, the weather's getting better. You think you're going to have
Yeah.
all this extra energy, and then you're just so achy, worn out. So that is an early symptom, which will often go away. But later symptoms over a period of a week or more could include trouble with breathing and a rapid heartbeat and death. And that's what happened to the woman, Betsy Arawaka. I can't remember for sure her last name. I don't have it here in front of me. But Betsy, the wife of Gene Hackman, passed away because of this hantavirus. These are very wealthy people living in a very prestigious neighborhood in a very elegant house, and even she was able to somehow get in contact with it. So if you think, you're a clean beekeeper and you're gonna, just be careful out there. Be really careful. Really careful.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, that's incredible how she contrasted it.
Yes, it is. It's sad. And as much as my heart goes out to the 95-year-old gentleman who was already suffering from multiple health problems and his wife, I also, when I heard that they had a dog that was stuck in a closet and it died, that really upset me. I mean, I was, I'm just thinking, like, what was going on in the head of that little dog? That dog is stuck in a closet and can't get out. Nobody's come to give him water. Nobody's come to give him food. Nobody's come to say hello. He's been in there probably for a couple of weeks, and then he died. And, I don't even know the name of that dog, but it's a sad thing.
Yeah,
Obviously, as the
this is a
people were
very
lost.
sad story.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very sad thing, and that dog is probably still disturbs me. Well, the lady too, she's quite young,
Yeah.
classical
Yeah.
pianist, and but what I don't
You
understand, and this yes, go ahead.
no, go you don't what part of it?
Oh, what I don't understand is how multimillionaires living in a house that's probably worth $10 million, don't have a housekeeper or a care assistant for Mr. Hackman. Like, why were they living alone where they weren't found for a couple of weeks after she had passed away? What
Mm.
on earth? Like, what were they going to do with their money? Like, why didn't
They both passed away?
they both passed away within a week of each other, her first, and he probably wasn't aware that she had passed away, probably. Just speculation, we have no way of knowing,
He
but
had the same
he
thing or it was
no,
something else? Yeah. Yeah,
he suffered badly from Alzheimer's. So
right.
couldn't be aware of everything going on around him. But he also had heart trouble, and that's what ultimately killed him at age 95. Maybe he wasn't taking his medicines. Maybe she was giving him medicine and, feeding him good meals, and then she's gone and he's confused, and then he died a week after she died. And the dog died somewhere in between that. So it's just sad. It's just a really sad story. But my point again is, you got that kind of money, folks, and you got somebody who's chronically ill, as Mr. Hackman was. Why on earth not have a health nurse or somebody, a live-in nurse, somebody to come by and check on things? That would have, helped her. She probably would have survived if she had had medical treatment when she first got sick. I just feel
Yeah.
so sorry for the fact that they
Uh,
were living in such isolation.
yeah, no, it is a very sad story, and I guess that all three of them are kind of together now. But now you guys gave me another thing to worry about.
Yeah, be careful, Benzina. If you got dead colonies, if you have dead colonies of bees, please, just slip on one of those ugly, horrible COVID masks that you still have hanging around the house, because that will at least filter out the worst of the
Yeah.
dust and stuff. And definitely,
But this,
you don't want.
yeah,
Mhm.
you don't want to be breathing. This is a good point. That's kind of what we should be driving that. But I hope we
Yes.
didn't get anyone very sad with this story too much.
Well, I hope we did. I want them to listen and remember. And this is
They're not gonna
not
listen
just.
if they make them sad.
Well, most people have already turned off this podcast because of all of our talk about the tariffs and so on. But I just want this is like a PSA, a public service announcement. Please be careful. Okay, that's me. That's my summary before we move on to feeding bees. But I have something that you sent, and let's have you talk about this one, please.
All right. Yeah, so I was like, why don't we talk about something that's, newsworthy, but also related to, the spring feeding. So this is kind of related to spring feeding, but it's not necessarily specifically meant for to boost up your bees for spring. So scientists from Cornell have developed a antidote to protect bumblebees from pesticides. So they developed this gel or this vaccine they call so where it's a hydrogen microparticle antidote. And this antidote consists of tiny biodegradable hydrogel particles that can bind and neutralize to pesticides inside a bee's body. When mixed into sugar water and fed to bumblebees, these microparticles significantly reduce pesticide toxicity in their systems. So in laboratory tests, bees given the antidote had 30% higher survival rate after exposure to lethal doses of pesticide. And yeah, so that's kind of the next step is to do their real world studies. But this is what they found in the laboratory essentially. It's essentially a gel that they mix in with sugar water that gets fed to bumblebees. And I'm guessing it could fed to honeybees too. Why wouldn't it be able to? But
Probably. I
yeah,
don't know if the authorities would clear that because of it being into the beehive. But because we are a bit concerned about microparticles, those little forever pieces of bits of plastics, microplastics, microparticles, microchemicals, and so on. But in a way, it's kind of sad that we have to invent what is very sad that we have to invent a microparticle, feed it to bees in order to reduce their death rate from by 30%. Like it'd be great if it were 100%, if this was like some, you know, some antidote for kryptonite or something, but you've got these neonicotinoids out there, and farmers, well, I don't think too many farmers, but some chemical peddlers might say, we don't have to worry about the bees anymore because we can let them have some microparticles and their resistance will be strong enough that that you can just go ahead and quit worrying about your neonics.
So I think what ends up happening is the they are microparticles that physically bind to the neonicotinoids, and once absorbed, the pesticides and the microparticles pass through the bee's digestive tract and are excreted without causing the same harm. The antidote has the potential to be selectively applied to other pesticides. This treatment improved the bee's motivation to feed and led a 44% increase in the number of bees able to walk a route mapped by scientists.
Oh, okay. So it does seem very helpful, but I just kind of wonder if we could maybe reduce those neonicotinoids and, not use so many neonics and in return not need to use this stuff either. But at least there's somebody out there thinking about the problem and trying to help in that way. And that's good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
now,
sorry, I just wanted to say, the scientist, the author of this study, the Julia Castro, or not of this article, but of the person interviewing the scientist. So she says bees are crucial for crop pollination and agricultural and food security. So it's important for people to take bee health seriously. So this is someone that's not necessarily a beekeeper. She's a scientist. And, sometimes, when I got into beekeeping, I thought, yes, it was like bees. It was very important. Not that other beekeepers are not taking it seriously, but I don't know. I guess it's not as discussed as much widely as it should be.
As it should be, yes.
Yeah.
I think, to some extent, us so-called environmentalists, I don't know, I guess I rank among them because I do certainly feel like the environment is something we need to conserve. So maybe I'm a conservative. But some of us maybe overemphasize the problem of neonicotinoids. And at first, I was actually kind of wondering, maybe neonicotinoids are okay because they only affect the plant, and then and the animals that chew on the plants, the insects that would kill the plants, die off. And it's so much better than back in the 70s and 80s when I started in beekeeping, and airplanes would fly overhead and just drop really powerful poisons on everything, including, the surfaces of beehives that are sitting nearby. So people have learned a lot, and then neonicotinoids came out, and I'm thinking, okay, this is much more directed against, it's not like it's spreading over everything, but it's going right into the seed and right into the plant. So I was kind of thinking, well, maybe that's good. And a lot of people were immediately raising the alarm that, well, maybe this is not so good. And it's looking like they might have been right. It does look like the neonics can be a really, really serious problem for honey beekeepers.
Yeah. Well,
maybe let's talk about
feeding. I was just gonna say we can create an antidote, and then create an antidote for the antidote.
Ooh,
and
let's do it. And an antidote for
the antidote.
For this podcast. Maybe we've just done that. We've just created an ad because people are going to start tuning out. Feeding bees. Okay. These were some of my colonies, and I used to use these. The next picture that we've got up, folks, for those of you who are listening to the podcast, the next picture we have up is colonies of bees out in a farmer's field, and they've got white inverted buckets with a brick on top of each so that the bucket doesn't blow away when it's empty. And these are positioned over top of a hole that's drilled into the lid of the bee colony. And then the bees can come up to that bucket, which holds sugar syrup, and the sugar syrup is slowly released by the bees as they bring it down. Now, that's one way of feeding bees. We're going to talk about maybe 6 different ways of feeding bees today. This is one that is especially good in the fall when you're trying to put a lot of weight into bees and get them ready for winter. In the spring, it's not quite as good because the weather can be so cold that the bees don't even come up into those exposed pails. Plus, it's harder to do this kind of feeding if your bees are wrapped for winter. So let's look at some of the
Yes.
other ways of feeding bees. What do you
And it
think
looks
about
like that
feeding?
in that picture
Yes.
there, it's later on in the season. It doesn't look like it's
It was in
early
the
on.
fall. That was fall feeding, not
Oh,
spring
that was
feeding.
fall feeding.
Some
Okay.
people, yeah, some people do use those buckets, but I'm going to recommend that they probably don't. So feeding frames of honey. What do you think?
Well, this can work if the frames are liquid, but
Mhm.
sometimes they're not liquid. They have crystallized, and the bees are not going to get to them.
Not as easily.
Yeah, not as easily. But even sometimes, like I found frames where everything's been taken out and then the little crystals left over.
That's right. That's right. It's really difficult for the bees to feed on old honey, especially if it's crystallized, because they have to mix water in with it, and it needs to be warmed up enough that they can access it and dissolve the crystals of the crystallization by adding more water, and then they can eat it. And there's also the risk of disease. So if you're using your own honey and you haven't had American or even European foul brood, and you feel kind of safe and comfortable that your honey is going to be okay to feed the bees, then that's putting a comb of honey in an emergency for a hive that's really hungry, and using your hive tool and just scratching some of those cells, the white cappings on that honey will make it a little bit easier for the bees to access. And
Yeah.
then it could prevent starvation as long as that honey is close enough to the main nest of the bees. So if they have a cluster and you've put in a comb of honey way over on the other side of the hive, then it's going to be much harder for the bees to access that, and they still might starve to death. So you could use frames of honey sparingly. You know that I don't recommend feeding liquid honey to the bees. You know why that is, Bidzina?
Well, I thought it was got to do with disease as well.
It does. It has to do with disease, but also, and this may come as a shock to a lot of newer beekeepers, honey is a wonderful food, a healthy food, full of vitamins and minerals and goodies for human consumption. But in the wintertime, about the best thing the bees can feed on to make sure they don't starve to death is not honey, but it's some sort of sugar. Clean, white, clear. You can buy organic sugar, because the sugar doesn't have the ash or the other contaminants or things that are just natural and healthy for us. But during the winter, when the bees are feeding on honey that you have extracted, and you pour it into a feeder or you put it near the hive, it can be really difficult for the bees to digest it during the winter because they can't fly out and do their defecation flight. So if they're stuck, also known as a cleansing flight. So if they're stuck inside the hive and they are eating, food, honey that's rich in minerals and ash content, ash meaning mostly from protein. They call it ash because at the end of doing a honey analysis, they will burn the residue and then measure the amount of ash that's left over. And that ash is
Yeah.
usually from nitrogen, and the nitrogen from amino acids, the amino acids from pollen. So that's where they can have a bit of a digestion problem. The other thing I worry about is if people extract their own honey and then they feed it back to the bees. I hope that anywhere along the line you have not heated the honey very much, because you can accidentally cook it, caramelize it, burn it, and that is devastating for honeybees, including if it's corn syrup or sugar. I once had a problem and I wrecked a whole bunch of hives because I let sugar that was being cooked get overheated and then fed to the bees, and dozens and dozens of colonies were almost dead by the time we went back and looked at them. So this is some reasons to avoid feeding honey to the bees. Disease, the ease at which bees can digest it, the ease at
No.
which bees can access it, and the potential for having it caramelized or other problems.
Now, let's say you're a new beekeeper and it's springtime and you're checking on your bees and you realize, oh no, they don't have a lot of honey. But you remember that, hey, I had a really good harvest last year and I got a bunch of jars of raw honey. And then you go home and you put that jar of honey and you heat it up like in a warm water, not too hot, and you feed that liquid honey. Is that you got to be careful, I guess, burning it, right? But at that point, it's still kind of, what if it's raw honey? It's like good, clean raw honey. It's still hard for them.
Well, it's going to be good and clean. You were selling it to people, but good and clean doesn't mean that it has no pollen. In fact, we want pollen to be in the honey as human consumers of honey, but the ash content from that honey, it makes it harder for the bees to digest. So I would say no. I'd say sell the honey, buy some good organic sugar. Organic sugar costs about 60% more, so if you buy a $10 sack of sugar, you might pay $16 for a sack of organic sugar, but then you can still sell your honey knowing that it's, been produced and without chemicals in the
What
honey production.
what
Yes.
what about fondant?
I don't know. What about fondant?
Yeah.
So, um there are different types of fondant, and one type that we've made here in our own house, and I've have some pictures up now of making fondant. It's for winter emergency feeding for the most part, although the bees can build up on it a little bit in the spring. But what you do is in this particular formulation, you end up with a very hard product, like rock hard. It's kind of like a lollipop, a sucker, you know. Children or those of us who are young at heart might like to have one of these lollipops, and that's the kind of sugar type that the bees are going to have when they are eating this. So you take 4 pounds of sugar, 2 cups of water. So that's a very trivial amount of water compared to the 4 pounds of sugar, and you heat this up to 235 degrees. And you actually have to check the temperature. It'll be like a really super, super hot and hotter than boiling temperature, 235 Fahrenheit. So you heat that up, and when it cools, it will be a hard rock of sugar that the bees can take down. Some people add a tiny amount of vinegar to help invert the sugars. Others say don't put vinegar in with it. So I can't say that it's good or not, but this is again another photograph, and we used a kitchen mix master to really stir the this very hot material, and it starts out being white and clear, and then it turns well, clear and not white, and then as it cools off, it's poured into pie pans, like you'd bake a pie in. We poured it into that, and then as it hardened, you could pop it out, take it out to the bees, and feed the bees.
Oh wow. Eh,
So that's one way. This is better for January, February type feeding when the weather is pretty cold and you see see the bees are right at the very top box, and you set that on top and put it right where most of the bees can access it quickly. And so I consider that to be kind of like a feeding method for somewhat emergency situations. although they do grow off of it. It does keep them alive. It's a little fussy to make. So there are other ways of going, and that's a different kind of fondant, which I've got in this photograph right now. So in this case, it's a commercial blend of soft candy. So it's more like, taffy or fudge. And
Yeah.
one mistake I've seen people make is they buy these things and they cut the bag open. So it comes in a plastic bag. You put it on top of your colony where the bees can reach it, if that's where the population of the bees is at the top of the colony. So you take off the lid. I have lids that have extra space, like they're tall lids, so that I can put things on top of the combs at the right time of the year. And one mistake people often make is they cut the bag open and then they flip the bag upside down and let that soft candy warm up because of the bees' heat, and then it melts and drips down on top of the bees. And that could kill bees and make quite a mess to clean up. So instead, like I really recommend instead to uh, just put the feed on with the solid plastic facing down, and then the part on the top being open, so that the bees they'll still access it. They'll take this down in a week or so. They'll eat that whole bag, and so it doesn't have to be dripping down on top of them for them to know it's there and for them to access it. That's the point.
Interesting. Because, yeah, I was recommended to have it face down. Oh, Apipasta specifically.
Yeah, that's what I'm using here, and I recommend that you don't.
Okay.
Okay, then there's another way of feeding bees. I love this. This is the frame feeder. So we keep a feeder, like a frame feeder, a division board feeder. There's so many different ways of calling it, but it's the same size as a frame, and it fits inside the bee colony, and it takes the place of two outermost combs. So I keep mine in there year round and in the top box year round, so that overwintered colonies can be accessed quickly, easily, and you pour the syrup in and feed them liquid syrup. In the spring, they recommend having a thinner syrup so the bees get the sense of producing nectar and stimulating the brood nest, whereas in the fall, if you use a feeder board, the frame feeder like this, then in the fall you want a thicker, heavier syrup with more sugar in it. But I use about 50-50 actually is the consistency. So about half water and half sugar, and then mix it up until it's nice and liquidy, and then dump it. So this kind of gives you a sense for what these things are looking like. Let me see. One of these is actually potentially
Video.
yeah, it was going to be a video, but I don't see it
If you-
happening as a video.
You gotta click, so in that bottom left corner, there's a play button. And on that video,
On 'em?
if you
Yeah, I've clicked it about 6 times.
Oh, I see.
7, 8.
Maybe
Okay, it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter.
click the
People
space
who
button
are
or whatever, yeah.
No, it's just not working. I think I might have needed to have set something before I even started my share screen. So anyhow, what we're looking at, what we're talking about is feeding these colonies of bees in the springtime by pouring more sugar, water into the colonies. I actually did this in February, which isn't usually recommended, but we had a forecast for several really warm days, and I knew that the colonies were fairly strong, so I thought they're not going to have any trouble reaching the feeders, taking up that syrup and using it, or storing it, just, putting it around where their tiny little brood nest might be. So this was late February, and I was feeding sugar syrup as partly to stimulate the bees, but mostly to be sure they didn't go hungry because they were going to be strong. Put that on. 1 week later, we went back out with the same amount of syrup for each hive, which was basically 4 liters or a gallon. And that they had taken down their first gallon in 1 week, and then they were working on their second. And then I also put the pasty fondant on top of the bees at the same time. Anyway,
Yeah, and
okay.
they were looking pretty strong there.
They are. Those are overwintered colonies in my backyard this year. Other methods, dry sugar. I know somebody who told me just the other day that they put dry sugar on their bees, and they put down some newspaper, and then right on top of the top bars of the back of the hive, not the front of the hive, but the back of the hive, near the brood, and they put a sheet of newspaper down, and then they dumped raw white sugar on top of that. And this gentleman told me that when he came back and checked, they had eaten it all. Now, this dry sugar is really good to keep bees from starving to death, but they won't store it and they won't build up on it. So it's like the emergency food. And do you recognize the gentleman in the photograph here that we're showing right now?
Is this Leonardo da Vinci?
It is.
Yeah.
It is Leonardo DiCaprio, and he keeps
Yeah,
bees.
sorry,
And
DiCaprio, not Da Vinci.
no,
That's it. Yeah.
close though, very close, very close. So he's also doing it wrong. He's got a picture of himself working his bees, and he's been dumping raw, plain sugar. Now he's probably living in California somewhere, and the weather's mild enough where they're getting up there easily. But I still think he should have bought some,
But
produced some sugar syrup.
so when you say emergency winter food, you want to give them dry possible feed as possible?
Well, this is like you're really stuck, you know? You're out there, you lift up the lid, and you just notice that it's full of bees and you don't see any combs of honey. And you haven't been to the bee shop lately. You don't have any stores you're going to be gone the next day. You don't think you're going to be able um, to mix up some sugar syrup and get back out there. But you might be able to grab a bag of sugar and dump the raw white sugar, granulated table sugar, right onto the colony of bees and keep them alive so they don't die. We don't want them to die.
Right. Okay, I see what you mean.
Here's another method of feeding bees.
My favorite.
Yeah, your favorite, but not mine. I certainly don't like this, and I highly recommend nobody do it. I've even seen people show pictures and how to feed sugar syrup in an open bucket or pail. And even within the city, I've seen people set up an open bucket and put in a bunch of sugar syrup and then something floating in it so not all the bees will drown and die, though a large number of them will. Um, and commercial beekeepers will often roll into an apiary, set out half a dozen 55-gallon drums, 45-gallon Canadian size, and the steel drums setting up in the edge of their apiary, and then they just tank it up with sugar syrup and let the bees rob it out. And they will rob. It's like a robbing season. They'll start picking on other colonies. That's why you want to keep these barrels a little ways away from the apiary, like, maybe 20 or 30 meters, like 50, 60, 70 feet away, so that they're not right next to a colony of bees. But some of the things that are good about using an empty barrel and filling it up with sugar syrup and parking it next to your apiary, not right next to it, but within a very short distance, is that it's easy to see if they're taking it down. And you can feed a lot all at one time. But unfortunately, there are a couple of downsides. One is that the bees can start robbing and then start robbing other colonies really quickly. It's also known, and this is known, it's been proven, that cattle will sometimes get curious and they will poke their nose down inside that sugar syrup and it will kill them. They'll drink it because it's tasty and they'll drop dead because that's what sugar does. It's also very easy to spread disease.
So
Yes?
if they eat too much or if they eat a little
The
bit.
cows?
Yeah.
The cows, I don't know what quantity, but it's enough that they can get into it and they can take enough down that it cramps up their bellies and they die. Literally die. Die dead, Not just die a little bit, but die dead.
Yesterday I was out feeding the bees, and there's a little cow on the farm, and I had some feed drip on the pallets and it came and licked it up.
Oh,
right?
I wouldn't have said that over a live podcast because that little baby calf is probably dead now, and you killed it, and you're gonna have to buy another $2,000 calf to replace it.
Well, should I let the owner know?
I don't know. You could ask, "How's the calf doing?" and not tell him that you, fed this, no, I think, Benzina, I'm pulling your leg a little bit. I don't think a small amount like that. The calf was licking a little bit that had dripped onto the pellet.
Yeah, some dripped on the pallet, and then it like
Mhm.
just stuck in its head in the little box. But yeah, it wasn't like it wasn't like a liquid syrup it could drink. It was
Right,
more,
okay.
yeah, more like
I
a
think you're
paste.
safe. I think you're safe. I think you won't get thrown out of that bee yard very, very soon. But you, yeah, you were kind of stuck there. It was kind of hard not to feed the bees and kind of hard, to keep the calf out of the bees at that moment. But I also want to add that you can spread disease very easily by using these open feeders. And some people, even in the city, will put out like a 5-gallon jug, open top container and filled up with sugar syrup and let their own bees rob it out. But then, of course, bees from all over the neighborhood are coming in there finding it. You're going to get robbing started. It could be a big problem for just kids riding a bicycle nearby because the bees get really irritated when they're robbing. But it could also spread disease, including foul brood, including nosema particularly. They seem to find really high incidences of nosema in situations where the bees have been open fed. So bad, in fact, that it's illegal to do this in the province of British Columbia. So
Interesting. Yeah.
so
I don't do this anymore, but this is what
yeah.
we saw other beekeepers doing
Mhm.
online, and we're like, this is it's a pretty good way. Why not?
Yeah, well, now you know why not. And the other, I don't have it in my list of points here on this slide, but the other thing that is pretty obvious is the strongest and best colonies are gonna be accessing the most syrup, and the ones that might really need it, that are a little bit on the weak side, but also short on honey, they're not gonna be able to fly out and collect it. It would be much better for those bees if the feeder were right there on the top of the colony, inside the feeder would be inside the colony, somewhere where they wouldn't have to be flying and competing with the stronger colonies to get to it.
Mm, okay.
We're almost done here, Betzina, but I did want to bring us around to something a little different. And we're talking about feeding bees, spring feeding. And one of the things I'd like people to think about is feeding a pollen or protein supplement or substitute. It's a supplement if there's already pollen coming in, and this just gives them that extra edge. And it's a full replacement if you have, at this time of the year, you have no flowers blooming. So you put a pollen cake or pollen patty, and depending on whether you're Canadian or American, you might use a different word there. And you put that pollen as close to the mass of bees as possible. Usually at this time of the year, in the northern part of the northern hemisphere, we would be putting the pollen patty or pollen cake on top of the colony, or, like lifting the lid and putting it in place. But it's also possible that you've got a really strong colony of bees, say in mid-April or so, and there just isn't enough good weather for the bees to be bringing in a lot of pollen. Then you can split the hive open, like if it's a two-story colony, and put that pollen feed between the two brood nests and probably also on the top of the hive. And the bees will have that pollen really close to the brood, which is where it belongs. You don't put a pollen cake, that's usually what I call it. You don't usually put a pollen cake on a place where there isn't any brood. You wanna see brood and put that pollen cake right above the brood, so it's only a few centimeters away. If you put it on the back of the hive or on a
So
super up above the hive, they won't use it.
So if you put it on the top, in the top,
Mhm.
they're not gonna eat it as much.
Well, if there's brood in the top box, they certainly will use it.
Okay.
So it
But
needs to be
ideally
brood.
in between the two brood boxes.
If there's brood in the bottom box, yes. For us, usually
So
it's just on top because usually we have no brood in the bottom box in the early part of the year. By about mid-April, you're going to have brood in the top and bottom boxes.
okay, I see what you mean. So the rule of thumb is just above the brood box. Well, sorry,
Above the
brood.
brood.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. You're absolutely
so,
right.
so what
Now,
do
okay.
you do about these bees getting squished every time you put these patties on?
Um, well, you pray for their little souls as they drift off towards bee heaven.
But
But
you're always gonna squish some every
yeah,
time you open these boxes.
well, not necessarily.
You don't have to, but
Right.
it's almost
If you
impossible not.
so just to back up a couple of paces, I have a photograph up of a colony of bees, a double-story hive that's being fed a pollen cake in between the two brood chambers. And next to that, I have a completely different photo taken just a couple of days ago of a box of these pollen cakes or pollen patties. And the pollen patties have holes on one side and no hole on the other side. Now, this is the opposite of the sugar fondant that we were talking about earlier. In this case, the little holes face down onto the brood. So I would take that pollen cake in one hand after smoking the bees to try to let them work their way down. Like, take your time. Don't, you're not just opening a hive and slapping it on and squishing down this pollen cake with your hands to kind of level it off. Take your time about this. But I would have that pollen cake in one hand after having smoked the bees, and I would kind of like move my hand back and forth so that the edge, the bottom of that pollen cake is kind of like moving more bees out of the way. And they actually will run. They'll see that thing. It might touch them. It won't hurt them at this point, and they can get out of the way. And then you quickly turn the thing over, holes facing down. You want the top to have this complete protection so it doesn't dry out, but the holes are facing down because that's where the brood is going to be. So you do that, and if you don't squish it down with your hands and you put your lid back on gently, almost always you'll find that you haven't killed any bees, or you've killed 2 or 3 or 4 bees that maybe, maybe they didn't deserve to live. I don't know, but you most likely will get away without killing bees by doing it that way, especially if you don't have to open up your colony, a double-story colony, and put the pollen between 2 boxes of brood, but just put it on the very top of the hive. Take the lid off, put it on, and then, as I mentioned earlier, I use a lid that is extra deep. So it's like a big rim all the way around, sets on top of the colonies. That's my lid, and it has about 4 or 5 centimeters, like a couple of inches of space up there that I can put sugar, I can put pollen cakes, and I don't have to squish it down or put the lid on and squish the lid down. It's got all that extra space so that the
Yeah.
bees aren't getting crushed. I want to mention
Yeah.
one more thing about the pollen, Betsina, before we move on. I want to encourage people to use more pollen in the spring than they normally would. Put more pollen cakes or pollen patties if you're Canadian. Put more pollen on the colonies because every every pound, let's use pounds, every pound of pollen that you put on your honeybee colony when the crocuses and willows are first starting to bloom is a pound of pollen that the honeybees don't have to collect from the wildflowers that the wild bees might be able to use. So if we're worried about competition between honeybees and wild bees, this is one way to lessen the impact of your bees. Now, later in the summer, when the clovers, alfalfa, whatever it is that you typically have in your area are blooming. When you have a major honey flow and good weather, then your honeybees are not particularly interfering with the work of the native bees, not anywhere near as much as they would in the spring when flowers are really limited. So feeding pollen in the spring is a way of keeping the bees from taking as much pollen from wildflowers as they might otherwise take.
Yeah, I did one of my hosts where I have my beehives. They told me that, hey, the bees are going inside of our bird feeders. Do you know why that they're doing that? And I guess they're looking for pollen.
Yeah, they most likely were. That's a really good point to bring up, and it's something that I didn't even have any pictures about, but some people will sprinkle things like, soy flour or anything that's a weast, like, a whey byproduct that you can buy at health food stores or anywhere. You can put that on, like, an open pan and just sprinkle it out somewhere where it will be covered, so the snow doesn't get on it, but the bees can still get in there to access it, and they will collect that as if they were flying out to flowers. And the bees can get so desperate for pollen in the spring that they actually, and I've got pictures, maybe next time I'll bring up some pictures, they are actually known for collecting grains of coffee grounds from
Right.
garbage and bringing that back to the hive. It's black. People sometimes open up the hive in the spring and they say, there's nothing blooming, but the bees are bringing in black pollen. Well, they're not bringing in black pollen. They're so desperate. They're bringing in black coffee grounds. And they try to use it as food. I mean, it looks like it could be food. It smells, well, coffee smells fabulous. So there's that. Uh, Bees have even been known to work on sawdust, like to
Yeah.
bring back chunks of sawdust when they're desperate for pollen, when there's no other flowers blooming. And also, for those of you who are living in very rural areas, your bees may be interfering with cattle as the cattle are being fed in these long open troughs. The rancher or the farmer will go by with a bucket of grain and sprinkle it along this big open trough where the cows will come out and start eating. But because it looks and smells so much like pollen, then the honeybees are attracted. And once the honeybees are around there, sometimes the cows get spooked and they kind of back away and they don't want to be there. So
Mm.
be careful about that. And one way of preventing that from happening and bothering your neighbors is to put out a tray of pollen dust of some sort of supplement that you could, like I mentioned earlier, some soy meal or something like that.
Right.
Or and they sell that material too. The bee supply places will sell that sort of stuff. Or put in your pollen cake onto your colony as well.
Yes. Uh, yeah. No. That it was just a funny observation, but yeah, they will do
Mhm.
stuff like that.
They were definitely looking for something that was, like dusty and loose and that they were bothering. Maybe they weren't bothering, but your observant landlord there noticed that the bees were around these bird nests,
Yeah.
bird houses that they had put up. Yep.
But all right. Yeah. Should we finish off there?
I'd like to. I think we've covered a lot of ground. We had 3 or 4 really interesting stories to start things off. We did cover everything I wanted to about spring feeding. So, it's just kind of like an overview. People need to learn more what works in their area, talk to other beekeepers around you and see, what are they doing at this time of the year? How are they feeding their bees? And just kind of learn from that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I like it, and it's exactly what we needed to learn. So thank you everyone for listening. Join us next week at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. We might have to change that because we're not. But
Well,
yeah,
I've been
join us.
sick, so I miss posting several
I'm Me too.
times, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna try to get back onto my schedule again.
Okay. But yeah, join us
And
next
you've been
week for
busy.
Yeah, it's been spring is upon us, but don't worry, we're gonna keep rolling with this. And
yeah.
Join us next week for a fresh conversation about bees. Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone, for
Bettina.
listening. See you later.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, see you later. Bye.
Bye.